Hello, this video is intended to showcase the Splendorous tools in their final state. We're going to look at the previous stages very briefly, as well as the final stage added in patch 6.51 as part of the Growing Light patch. This is obviously a long-running saga of crafting and gathering relics for level 90 for the Endwalker expansion, and I went out of my way to grind these out because quite honestly, I thought that they were better looking, and in fact, much more required effort was needed for these than the combat route. Anyway, without further ado, let's go through these weapons, then we'll talk about how I got them, and then what I think about them at the end. So to kick this off then, I thought it would be a really cool idea to just go through every single stage and see what they look like. We've got lots of details on the screen. You can pause in your own leisure and see all of the bits and pieces, as well as the item level and what you get for each stage, but for the most part there is a natural progression visually at the very least. There are some stages, especially the first two, that don't really change, but then it progressively gets more crystalline as you progress, especially here as you can see with the pickaxe, until you get to the Varandic version, which kind of loses all that crystal and puts it in the middle, until eventually at Lodestar it erupts out. I really like the Lodestar look. I think it's very unique. Whilst it's sheathed, obviously you have the Varandic look until you pull that out. All of this lovely metal here going up. I thought it would be nice to have some close-ups for each of these weapons. And the dyes aren't too bad on this one. As you can see, it's mostly the shaft that dyes. Just went through the basic RGB colors there, nothing too crazy. Otherwise it would take me forever. But yeah, I actually really like this one. I think the pickaxe is one of my favorites out of it. It's big enough that you can see it, and obviously, you know, I'm gonna be doing a lot of gathering. I plan to do some of the Sky Builder stuff as well, so that's gonna take some time. I might go back and do that. But yeah, it looks really good in battle, as you would say, with a rock. But yeah, you can also use the glow on back macro. It works with these weapons if you've never seen it before. So definitely have a look at that, give it a pause. But yeah, I'm happy with the pickaxe. Now we move on to the second of our gathering classes. This is Botanist. And yeah, as you see, the first two stages from initial purchase to the augmented don't change. And then bam, you've got that crystalline stage with leaves popping out the top and that almost like a fossil leaf stuck to the side of a crystal. And that shine starts to come through. And then we get the Brilliant with the spinnies. I think the Brilliant stage is easily one of the best. You can buy replicas, which is how we're doing the majority of this video, of the previous stages. And then with Varandic, obviously, into Lodestar, we've got that black hilt with the crystalline, almost crystal tower sort of light coming through that. And then you've got that sort of brass as well. Almost cogs as well. Very, very nice stuff. It looks sort of industrial revolutionary. Adds loads of ease to the end. Yeah, to get my point across. Yeah, the dyes aren't too bad on this either. Quite striking in more bright colors like red. You'll find a lot of the previews, sadly, the dyes look pretty awful, or you can't even tell what's dyed. But I decided to follow pretty much the same formula for each tool so that we could get a decent look at them. But yeah, I like the hatchet. It's nice. I think the gathering tools you just see more of, especially out in the wild. This is going to look really good when you're doing future content, and I definitely intend to use this as a skin, at least for the hatchet going forward. I don't like many of them. So for the fisher, there's slight differences in terms of what you have to do. There's always like two different types of fish to acquire that usually give different quantities of either reel or rod components. The progression is quite interesting. There's not a lot to talk about here. Again, we go through that sort of different colors of wood, and then the crystal comes out. And then, of course, as we progress into Varandic, we lose that, but it gains this kind of like steampunk sort of vibe with the brass there. And then with Lodestar, it just erupts with ether, and a crystal grows on the side of it. Very cool stuff. Again, there's some really good macros on the internet. If you get stuck with any fish, type the fish's name into the lodestone, and people have come up with great macros to save you on bait, because some of the fish are like 4 seconds into a cast. So what that macro would do is cancel for you. Definitely don't just fish without it. you'll waste too much bait. This is what I was talking about with the dye ability. Some of the tools look better than others. It's like the smallest section on the rod that actually dies, which is a real shame. But I suppose, you know, you do have lots of crystals stuck to the side of it. I was quite happy with the fishing rod. It wasn't my favorite, though, out of the gatherers. I think that's probably still the pickaxe, but I think they did a decent enough job. And yeah, I don't think it's going to replace, like, my personal preference of, like, the blessed rods and things like that, the achievement rods. But it's definitely quite swanky, and another one to add to the collection, of course. Lovely jubbly. I do like me some fishing. Alright, and then we've got the first of the crafters. I chose to start with Weaver. Fairly unassuming start. Obviously, Weaver has had some really cool looking tools in the game before. Especially with the embroidery section. They like to have fun with that. As you can see here, the early stages, not really too much to write home about. Brilliant is okay. I'm not a fan of the frame at all, but I'm also not really much a fan of this final stage either, Verandic or Lodestar. I think that the crystals and the effect is nice, but the Verandic design here is not my cup of tea. I don't really like stripes, personally. It's okay. It's not my favorite Weaver relic in the game. Not by a long shot. The dye ability, although quite difficult to see past the glowies, is more noticeable because the fabric section itself is actually changing colour. So that's a good sign. Yeah, it's okay, but it's certainly not the best. Personally, I think the Sky Steel one is probably the best they've done. It's going to be very difficult to top that, and I don't think this tops it in the slightest, but you might disagree. It looks cool. Again, the glow on back macro, if you go back and pause that, /BM/sit on two separate lines, you can get the, obviously, if a tool is on your hip, it will glow there instead of on your back. Now we move on to the saw. Now the saws are probably some of the most impressive. I even like the base design. There's something about a massive saw. I think it's because it looks more like a weapon than anything else. Oh, look at that. The crystalline one is beautiful. Moving there through the different colors of the metal with Chorzoi. And then the brilliant one, I would definitely consider going back to this stage. I think I prefer that to Verandic and the final. Verandic and the final Lodestar version remind me of something you would probably cut a tree down with rather than cut wood. Its serrated edge is, or like a metal saw or something. Yeah, it's okay. I like it. It's got a unique design, and the glow's nice, and it dies okay, but I think the brilliant one is probably better. Just my personal opinion, you might disagree, but this is quite striking. Like, people see this from a mile away, and the actual dye comes out as well. It actually is visible, which is good. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with saws. Saws are some of the biggest tools in the game. Like I say, you could very easily do some damage with that if they allowed us to attack monsters. That would be awesome. And it looks really cool if you do the glow on hip macro as well. Yeah, I'm a real big fan of a lot of these. But yeah, I personally prefer the brilliant stage on quite a few of these because it's just prettier. So now we move on to Goldsmith. This is the start of many hammers, as you would imagine. Yeah, fairly, again, unassuming starts. Goldsmith is quite fun. I actually enjoy Goldsmith for some reason. I don't know. It's just a fun thing to play around with. I always prefer either Goldsmith or Weaver when it comes to crafting stuff, but especially for dailies and stuff. Brilliant stage, it's okay. Goldsmith has the unfortunate reality of having a very small tool, as you can see here with both Verandic and Lodestar. It sort of reminds me of a gavel that you would use in like a courtroom or an auction or something. It's very pretty. I like how the black and the brass comes through that. The dyes, sadly, only affect the head, which, I mean, you can barely see them. I suppose if you sheathed it, you would have a better chance of seeing the dyes. But again, it's such a small, like a minute section of metal that's being affected. Bit of a shame, really, but I suppose that's the surface area of the weapon not really being that visible. But yeah, pretty cool item. It looks really cool if you have a glow on the hip. Again, I like glowies. I like glowies. And subtle glowies, even if it's reduced by the size of the item, always works as well. And then we'll be moving on to, you've guessed it, yet another hammer for Armorer. Armorer has a really beautiful starting stage. I really like the Splendorous one. Very nice. And then suddenly it goes to a crystal, a crystalline. Absolutely beautiful. It reminds me of something that would you'd eat. I don't know why. I look at some of these and I go, I wonder what flavor that crystal is. There's something clearly wrong with me, or I'm far too hungry before recording videos. But and then the Varandic raising hammer there, looking okay. I quite like this. It's kind of a very straight, long shaft with the blue coming through there. It's quite nice. I think it's better probably than the Goldsmith one. I like that flat head as well with the blue. Yeah. Die ability, all you're really going to see is the tip of the hammer change. That's all you're really going to see, unfortunately. It's, yeah. I suppose one thing I'd like to see in the future would be the ability to change the way that things glow, or at least the color of glows. I don't know if that's even remotely possible for this game. It's the sort of thing I would love to see in a future graphics update. I don't expect it for Dawn Trail, but it would be really cool if we could affect the way that glows are. And if they backdate a lot of these items to have dual dye channels, it'll be interesting to see what the second channel they choose is, especially for relic weapons and Splendorous tools and things like that. Moving on to, yet again, another hammer, this time the Blacksmith. I'm not a fan of the Blacksmith early stages. They're nice and bulky, but they don't have the same beauty, I think, as the Armorer ones this time around. That big chunk of crystal on the end of a stick, very nice there. Chorozoids changing the colour of the metal. And the Brilliant one does look quite nice, actually. That does look lovely. But back down to sort of like a curved hammer for the Crosspeen Varandic. And then for Lodestar, that curved bottom with the spike, which sounds very painful, especially if you sheath that too quickly. That spike there looking awesome. I actually really like the final version of this, much more than the Brilliant stage. So it's completely the opposite. Die ability is a little bit better. The shaft itself, not that you can see probably for my terrible camera art work here, but some of the metal on the back also dies, but yeah, it's minimal. It's not like everything dies, unfortunately. Yeah, it's a nice hammer. It's probably not as good as the Armorer one, but there we go. And it looks nice if you do the glow on hip. That looks really cool, actually. Yeah, and that's how you'll probably see that all the time, doing your expert recipes and the like. So when it comes to alembics for Alchemist, I was amazed at how beautiful and detailed these were, even at the base stage. Like, they just blew my mind, like the early stages. Look at that crystalline one with that soft glow. The thing about Alchemy is that it just is completely different to everything else. Visually, just everything. It's very, very cool. I like it. The final version is really cool as well. It reminds me of a soul vessel for some reason. I think it's because it's that pointy shape. And the Lodestar alembic there, really cool. It's also a lot bigger than a lot of the other tools. So, and it's hip mounted. Yeah. The dies aren't too bad. It's like the metal frame. You can just about see it on this preview. It's not too bad. Again, it would be cool if we could dye the crystals as well. That would be amazing. But again, who knows how long it's going to be before the game gets that kind of support. But Glamour is, endgame, and we're looking at it. As soon as an expansion comes out, these tools will become useless, apart from as skins, so it is important to think ahead. Oh, and the other thing with Alchemy as well is the way that it sits on top of the other tool. It looks amazing with that glow, that radiance. Moving on to Leatherworker then, as you can see, the round knives. Yeah, kind of cool. Remind me of pizza cutters for some reason. Every time I look at Leatherworker, I go, ooh, I fancy pizza now. Again, another issue with being hungry before making videos, but again, these are quite cute. The Varandic one is probably my favorite out of all of these stages for this, because it literally is just a big round pizza cutter, and the Lodestar one is practically the same, just with crystals stuck in it. It's very nice. I would love to cut my pizza with this any day, and it looks really nice on the hip. Really nice. Yeah, for the most part, I'm quite happy with these. Like I say, there is only a couple that I'm not really that tickled by. A lot of them are blowing my mind with the detail and the quality that they've provided for both the spell effects, the crystal design itself. Not so much the dye ability, but we can kind of overlook that. But also the difficulty involved in these, you know, it's much greater than just go get me some tomestones. Next stage, go get me some tomestones. So, yeah, I'm hoping that they go back to this route for combat in the future. Culinarian then, I really love the Culinarian pans. They are absolutely fantastic. We've got a carbuncle inside that changes and it glows. It might be one of my favorite weapons in the game. It's just awesome. Especially this stage, the Brilliant stage. Look at that. Isn't that fantastic? I'm very tempted to go back to that. So the Varandic one just turns it into a massive fry pan, like a skillet. And then the Lodestar one sort of extenuates that with more spell effects. But yeah, massive skillet there. I do prefer the Brilliant stage, but yeah, I thought we'd have as little clothing on as possible for the pan so we can cook in our appropriate glamour. Dye ability, not too bad actually. You can see a lot more of a pan than I expected to be changed, mostly because of how big that skillet is. How three-dimensional it is. Looks really cool, and I would imagine this could very easily be used as a weapon and could do some serious harm to someone. Don't let me near anybody with a pan, because there's going to be a bonk noise, essentially. But yeah, I really like these weapons. They did a great job. When I first saw the initial somebody with a Lodestar, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to get those. And then I saw more of them. I was like, okay, I'm going to get them all. I'll make a video on them. So here we are. Yeah, I really enjoyed the process as well. It was great fun. Okay, so basically how I got these weapons was down to a couple of websites. Mostly I followed the Teamcraft guides. I'm not affiliated with Teamcraft, but their, you know, easy to navigate system was incredibly helpful when I was trying to remember how many of something I needed to craft. So a lot of my data comes from their website. There are a bunch of macros as well that people have come up with, especially for fishing. Usually if you just search the fisher's name on the lodestone, if you're having trouble with it, people have posted working macros where essentially a fish could be the first fish within 4 seconds, and to prevent you wasting the bait, because for the obviously for the Splendorous stuff, the bait is the select bait, which is quite expensive. It's either obviously gathering scripts or of course from the market board, so you don't want to waste any of that, especially when you're fishing, you know, over 100 fish of a type. Then you obviously want to make the most out of each cast, so you have the ability to create a macro that cancels the cast. There's also really useful things for crafting as well, especially for the expert recipes, but at the end of the day, expert recipes are going to be down to a bit of RNG and you trying to brute force your way through that and methodically think at each step. Sometimes it's just better to exit out the craft and start again. So for that purpose, I would say definitely gather or acquire more items than you need from a market board, because the likelihood is that you're going to be needing more than that anyway by a significant margin. But yeah, for the most part, it was very fun. There's not really any way I can directly say which was the hardest out of any one particular item. I will say that I personally thought that the gathering was a little bit more strenuous, mostly because of moving around between areas. And when you're moving around between areas gathering, especially for fishing, it's quite tedious after a while. It reminds me quite heavily of the reason I didn't go for the Sky Builder fishing titles. I went for a crafting Saint of the Firmament instead. So yeah, I definitely preferred the crafting. I think that was very, very difficult in places. A lot of RNG involved, but at least I didn't have to move around. I'm quite lazy. I just want to focus on what I'm doing rather than where my character is stood. Something I should say though is that my recommendation for you, if you're going to go into any of these relics, just make sure that you've got yourself a full set of indicators and try and get as much materia in it as possible that's useful for you. Especially for the gatherers, you'll end up with like twice as many fish or tree logs as you would normally get. It makes things so much quicker, honestly. So make sure you get yourself a full set of indicators. Not forgetting your offhands as well, especially when it comes to crafters. The difference between, you know, actually getting that extra piece, especially on the final one on the lodestar, that extra bit of quality, it all counts. So get a full set of this. Try to pentameld it if you can. Get 620 item level, and then obviously use whatever weapon. Make sure you have the tool equipped. I actually spent about 3 hours fishing with two things. First of all, I mean, you don't see it here, but make sure you have the select bait purchased and used. Don't just let it default to whatever you might have. I have versatiles. You're going to be stood there for a very long time. And additionally, make sure you actually equip your fishing rod, like the actual Splendorous one or whatever stage you're on. That was another thing I forgot to do. So I ended up just face palming and going to bed at that point. It sounds like a very simple mistake, but it's a very costly one, and you could quite easily forget either the correct tool, which is less likely, but the bait. Oh, the bait. Remember to actually put the correct bait on. But yeah, I really thought that this was a great series of tools. It was a rival to any relic weapon in the game, and personally I think that the Hildebrand weapons should be rethinked into the future, especially for Dawn Trail. I personally would like to see the same effort applied to all types of shiny weapon that they add to the game, be that gathering, crafting, or combat. And for, you know, crafting and gathering to be superior in that regard is a little bit embarrassing personally, I think. But yeah, there we go. I love these weapons. Let me know what you think about them. I had a lot of fun making this video. It took me a while to put together, as you would imagine. And of course, there'll be a link to the Teamcraft guide section that I followed. And yeah, if you need any help, leave a comment below and I'll do my best to respond to those. Much love. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.